Now, an event worth appreciating concerning the immigrant women's experience and what led to reform that led to immigrant rights and women's rights and children's rights is a very important event known as the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire that occurred in 1911. Industrial growth affected factory workers most directly. Working conditions were often dangerous. And family survival required women and children to work, often in the lowest paid, most exploited positions. Women and children worked in poor ventilation, dangerous fumes, open machinery, no safety precautions, and in unhealthful conditions. Let's appreciate what happened to primarily Jewish immigrant women in New York in 1911.
It was late in the afternoon on a beautiful spring Saturday, March 25th, 1911. 4:40 p.m. to be exact, nearly quitting time at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York's Greenwich Village, where 500 workers, mostly young Italian and Jewish women and girls, got ready to collect their pay and go home. Someone dropped a match or a cigarette, and within minutes, the factory, which occupied the top 3 floors of a 10-story building, became an inferno. Fire ladders, which reached only 6 floors, were useless. The fire escape collapsed under the weight of desperate workers trying to escape. One of the doors, it would be reported, was locked. Onlookers out for a weekend stroll in nearby Washington Square Park watched in horror as women leapt to their deaths from upper-story windows, some crashing through the firemen's nets, others hitting the sidewalk with a sickening thud. It's almost a mirror of what happened in 9/11.
In some ways, it was the horror of the fire jumping the way they did. And it was more intimate, though. You could look into their faces in their last moments, hear them hit the pavement that way, you know.
In the days that followed, family members crowded into a makeshift morgue, trying, sometimes in vain, to identify those they lost among the charred remains. On that day, says researcher Michael Hirsch, all of New York was united in grief.
This fire really shook people up. You know, the city was so guilt-stricken that maybe we were somehow responsible. And it led to all of these reforms that came afterward.
Okay, for want of time, we don't have enough to share the rest of the clip, but what's important to understand is progressive reform in the socialist tradition. And one of the things that was so important here was to challenge the Democratic and the Republican Party to do something with regards to immigrant rights, to women's rights, to children's rights. And of course, it had to end in tragedy to finally get politicians to listen. And that's why the importance of progressive reform. And again, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, immigrants having to die, in this particular case, women dying as a result of unfair labor practices. Now, World War I is a turning point with regards to progressive reform because the United States now is going to go to war and it will not entertain dissent. And so the United States is going to pass one of the most important acts that's still in the books today, and that is the 1917 Espionage Act. And the Espionage Act forbade the use of disloyal, profane, scurrilous, or abusive language about the United States government, its flag, or its armed forces, or speeches that caused others to view the American government or institutions with contempt. Now, this act was very important because the majority of people were not signing up to go and fight in the war. And so the act allowed the Postmaster General to refuse to deliver mail that met the same standards for punishable speech or opinion. And so the act was to be applied only in times when the United States is in war, because you're either with us or you're against the enemy. Or you're either with us or you're with the enemy. So the Espionage Act made it a crime to aid enemies of the United States or to interfere with the war effort or with military recruitment. And so another act that was very important was the Sedition Act of the Alien and Sedition Act of 1918. The act extended the provisions of the Espionage Act to cover a broad range of offenses, notably speech and the expression of opinion that cast the government or the war effort in a negative light or interfered with the sale of bonds. One historian of American civil liberties has called this act the nation's most extreme anti-speech legislation. And those convicted under the act generally received sentences of imprisonment for 10 to 20 years. The Espionage Act was used to imprison Americans who spoke or wrote against World War I, and that act is still with us to this day. And then in 1918, the Alien and Sedition Act. Again, this Alien and Sedition Act is important because there's two precedents for Americans to use the term alien when referring to immigrants. This term alien is associated with sedition. That's the key. Alien is always associated with sedition. Hence, to use the term alien indicates the person has identified people who are not loyal to the United States. And that is where the nativist character comes in, because they want to use the term alien to describe somebody who automatically is not for this country. So again, please understand that alien at the very beginning was used in reference to Europeans. Eventually now, remember, to the white beans. Those aliens were the white beans first. Then eventually it's going to be applied to the black beans and the brown beans. Europeans acquired this description. Why? Because in 1917 and 1918, they were organizing into unions and they were trying to survive for their own benefit. They were very radical in the sense that they did not want to overthrow existing authority, but they wanted to at least have the authority make sure that they were treated decently as human existence, as human beings. So for us today, this loyalty became emphasized after 9/11.